In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and everything that dwells in them. Everything was perfect. God made man and woman to take care of his creation and were placed in the middle of the Garden of Eden. The man was named Adam. The woman was named Eve. They were allowed to eat from every tree and bush in the garden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But the man and woman disobeyed God when a clever and deceitful serpent came to Eve and twisted what God had said. It convinced her that no harm would come from eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Through the serpent's deception, both Adam and Eve made a choice and ate from that one tree, thus disobeying God and allowing sin and death to enter the world, tainting God's beautiful creation. But God had a plan. God chose a people, his people, to arise in the midst of the brokenness. The Old Testament tells the history of his people and the need for a rescuer. While the problem of sin carried on in the lives of all, sin had no place in God's presence. But as everyone is guilty of doing wrong, no one would be able to approach God. But God desires more than this. He wants people to know him, but more than that, he wants a relationship. God's ultimate plan was for his Son to free all people from sin and to have a personal relationship with him. And so the Savior came to earth just as God's prophets had predicted many years prior. It happened in a rather unconventional and unexpected way, on a silent night in a manger. But it was on that night that the hope of the world, the hope for reconciliation with God and freedom from sin, had arrived in the form of God's Son, Jesus Christ.
Following the birth of God's Son, Jesus Christ, the main action of the Bible moves forward a number of years, to when Jesus was baptized and started his ministry here on earth. He gathered 12 disciples who became friends of Jesus. They traveled with him while he shared with others who God was and performed many miracles. He cured the sick, raised the dead, calmed a storm while they were at sea, and many other normally impossible acts. He spoke in parables and held different sermons that crowds upon crowds attended. Through this ministry, he gathered a large following of people, but Jesus had a far greater purpose to yet fulfill. On Passover, Jesus and his followers entered Jerusalem. The multitudes came out to see him with fervor and excitement. Not everyone was excited, nor did everyone who followed him recognize him as the Son of God. Most of the Pharisees and the Sadducees refused to believe Jesus was the Messiah and accused him of being a blasphemer. They tried getting the crowd to turn on him by asking questions meant to attract him, but Jesus saw through their scheme. A short time later, Jesus gathered his 12 disciples for a meal, where it was revealed this was the last time they would be together. This is when Jesus taught them about communion, the breaking of bread, and the sharing of wine, which symbolizes his body and blood soon to be broken and shed for all. This confused the disciples, and this was the first time they realized that Jesus was about to die. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, leading the guards to him and sealing Jesus' fate with a kiss. Although the disciples tried to defend Jesus, he told them to put their swords away, for those who live by the sword die by the sword. He was then arrested to be put on trial. The disciples were lost and confused, but what they had failed to understand, Jesus' arrest was part of God's plan and his ultimate purpose was about to be fulfilled.
Jesus was brought before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate to be tried. There was nothing fair about Jesus' trial. There was no legal precedent for it. The priests, Pharisees, and Sadducees broke laws as they plotted to kill Jesus prior to his arrest. For calling himself the Son of God, he was wrongfully sentenced to death by crucifixion, which is the nailing or binding of an individual to a cross. After his trial, Jesus was beaten and lashed. A crown of thorns was thrust onto his head, and he was made to carry his own cross. He struggled under the weight of the cross and the pain he endured. Jesus stumbled multiple times. Even Simon of Cyrene helped him as he carried his cross all the way to Calvary, the site of his crucifixion. Jesus' hands and feet were nailed to the cross he carried, and the cross was stood upright. Beside him hung 2 convicted criminals also sentenced to death. Nearing death, one of the criminals asked Jesus to forgive him of the crimes he had committed, and Jesus did. Jesus was mocked by the soldiers and others who watched as he hung humiliated on the cross, life seeping from his body. Instead of condemning them, he asked God his Father to forgive them, for they know not what they do. After hours of pain, torment, and suffering, Jesus took his last breath and died, proclaiming, "It is finished."
After Jesus' death on the cross, Joseph of Arimathea made a request to Pilate to have Jesus' body surrendered to him so it could be buried in accordance with Jewish law, as opposed to being thrown into the valley of Gethsemane like most victims of crucifixion. Jesus' body was wrapped in linen cloths and placed into the tomb after Pilate approved Joseph's request. Jesus' body rested for the next 3 days in the tomb. The disciples and Jesus' other followers were distraught, with many separating and going their own ways, filled with a sense of hopelessness and defeat. But Jesus' death wasn't the end of the story, as many of the disciples believed. Jesus' death was necessary to pay the price of sin for all humankind. Everything that happened was all part of God's plan, especially what happened next. The Bible tells us that on the third day, Jesus rose from the dead, becoming Lord and Savior for all by conquering sin and death, and completing God's plan for salvation. Through Jesus' death and resurrection, we are now able to have a right relationship with God. There is now hope for the future for all who receive Jesus as their Lord and Savior. A promise to live with God forever when our life here on earth comes to an end. This is the ultimate victory. This is the ultimate act of love. This is Easter.
Thank you for joining us. With the Easter season now in full swing, store shelves are lined with chocolate eggs, bunnies, stuffed animals, and toys. For many, Easter is a time for family. As the family of God, Easter represents the pinnacle of our faith, as explained in the video you just watched. We needed a rescuer to save us from our sin. God delivered that in the form of his Son, who came to die for us. And furthermore, he promises us life with him after our time on earth comes to an end. We hope that this video spoke to you in some way, and even if it didn't, we would love to hear your thoughts. We also want to invite you to join us for one of our Easter services coming up, whether that be Palm Sunday, Good Friday, or Easter Sunday. If you can't make it in person, you can also watch them live online at the link below. Thank you for watching this video. And may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may you find a renewal of peace, hope, and love this holiday season. Happy Easter.